opening of this consultation webinar that is co-organized with the UNESCO National Commission in Sri Lanka and in partnership also with Brainwiz. Without any further ado, I would like maybe to give the floor to our director, Mr. Eric Falt, who is the representative of UNESCO in India, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Bhutan. Eric, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Omar, and it's good to see all of you despite the circumstances. I would like to say hello in particular to my friend Dr. Miga Swate, whom I saw earlier on the screen, Secretary General of the National Commission. I see Dr. Sedere as well on the screen, and many others. So it's good to be able to discuss with you today something which is, of course, important for millions of people around the world, because COVID-19 has put all of us in an unprecedented situation and has completely turned on its head many institutional settings, all institutional settings. And one of the most affected audiences is clearly the students, whether they are children, which we define in the UN as under 15, or youth, but also the teachers and those involved in education systems across the globe. So it is very important that we continue to engage with the education community during this global crisis. In this regard, I would like to thank at the beginning of our webinar our partners, Brainwiz, and of course the Sri Lankan National Commission for UNESCO, in helping us set up this initiative, this event that aims to address the futures of education, which is a global initiative to reimagine how knowledge and learning can shape the future of humanity and the planet. This is very important in the current situation, and I would like to assure you that throughout the last 2 months, UNESCO has remained continuously engaged with all stakeholders to ensure basically that learning never stops. We have engaged with stakeholders through webinars like this one, of course. I would like to draw your attention also to a number of our other initiatives, in particular the essay competition for children and youth that we launched last month. It's called Year 1 AC. AC stands for After Coronavirus, where we invite young people in India to tell us how they think the future should be. And I would love, together with the Sri Lankan National Commission, to extend this initiative perhaps in Sri Lanka as well, because quite clearly all the schools have been disrupted and will continue to be disrupted for quite a while, and we need to give opportunities and hope for young people. We've been working also on other issues such as cyberbullying, which has been more important than ever, unfortunately, in these times. We've been focusing on mental health problems that young students might face during the lockdown, and many other aspects. I don't want to be too long because we have a busy program, but I just want to end by mentioning that the Director General of UNESCO has convened an independent international commission specifically focusing on the futures of education, learning to become, and in fact, all of your inputs from this webinar will be shared by our team led by Omar, and I see Huma as well, with the UNESCO headquarters in the form of a report. So it's very important to take into account the views from Sri Lanka, and that is why this webinar is important. So thank you very much again in advance for participating.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. I'm so sorry I had a technical issue and I logged off, but I'm back. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Quickly, for all the panelists and UNESCO and all the participants who are present with us, thank you so much for joining us. This is a part of multiple such Futures of Education webinars and online and offline events that Brainwiz has hosted in partnership with UNESCO New Delhi. And we have received amazing response for all those events. So thank you so much. One slight request before we begin, I would request you all to keep your audios and videos off so that we could hear the speakers well and we could also see them on our screens well. I would also like to put it on record that this meeting is being recorded, so I hope that no one has reservations with that. I think UNESCO New Delhi will take lead and share the recording with all of us once it's ready. I would also take this opportunity to thank my colleagues Himali, Abhinav, David and Cynthia from UNESCO, who have been working very hard to make sure that this event happens as smoothly as possible. Another thing is that we have tried to make this event very, very inclusive for everyone. So everyone has had an opportunity to share their thoughts, share their questions that they have for the speakers, which they did through the registration form. And today's session is planned according to the suggestions and questions we have received from all of you. If I talk about the registrations that we received around 336 registrations for this particular event, in which 86% of the people claim that they have directly been working in the education sector. So we feel that besides the speakers whom we have here, we also have a very nice set of audience who are here to listen to the speakers. 90% of the participants also believe that this lockdown has given us an ample opportunity to rethink education and reimagine learning for the year 2050. And UNESCO is taking lead in doing that. I think it's, again, a great initiative to initiate something like that. We also had a question in mind where we wanted to address if people feel that there is a gap between the skills that the industry needs and that what the education system presently provides to the learners. And a staggering average that we have received is 3.9 on a scale of 5, which means that a lot of the people who work in the education sector believe that there is a huge gap that we need to address. And hence, the structure of this entire webinar is such that we have tried to include everyone's opinion in it, and our speakers will be very happy to address those questions when we open the floor for them. But before that, I would like to invite Huma. Huma is the convener of this particular webinar. She's from UNESCO New Delhi. She's the program officer there. Huma would like to introduce the initiative and introduce a couple of people to you. Huma, can we please have you?
Hello, everyone, and thanks a lot. On behalf of UNESCO New Delhi, I thank all of you for joining for this webinar. I would also like to share that UNESCO invites organizations and networks to mobilize their stakeholders and partners to conduct focus group consultations, sessions on the futures of education. Hence, this webinar is part of this collective effort where we need to collaborate with all stakeholders, that is, our esteemed panel members from the government, you, the audience who are watching, our partners, and of course, our UNESCO colleagues and other UN organizations that aim to ensure that learning never stops. Let me quickly share with you UNESCO initiative, Futures of Education, Learning to Become. UNESCO's Future of Education, Learning to Become initiative is an ambitious attempt to rethink education 2050 and beyond and help shape the future. The initiative is catalyzing a global debate on how education, learning, and knowledge need to be reimagined in a world of increasing complexity, uncertainty, and precarity. As part of this initiative, UNESCO has appointed a high-level international commission of thought leaders with diverse expertise and perspectives from the worlds of politics, academia, the art, science, and business. The International Commission will prepare a report which will be released in November 2021. That will provide an agenda for action and a discussion by policymakers and practitioners. When human aspiration is wasted, the world suffers. That is why we are calling learning to become. Pointing to a philosophy of education and an approach to pedagogy that views learning as a process of continual unfolding that is ongoing and lifelong. To think in terms of becoming is to involve potentials, reject determination, and express a flexible openness to the new, to develop the capacity to imagine a good and fulfilling life. Learning to become invites us to become something we have not yet become. The tragedy of the COVID-19 health crisis is creating exceptional circumstances that are affecting billions of lives and changing and causing massive economic, social, and educational disruptions. The multiple likely impact of COVID-19 on individuals and societies mean there will not be a return to the world that existed before. You all will agree that the present pandemic, the COVID-19 crisis, has underscored the importance of the Commission's mandate as a foresight exercise to explore, predict possible and preferred futures on our shared planet. I would like to underline that among the transversal issues to be discussed, particular attention is desired to be given to gender, with gender equality understood as a persistent, enduring challenge that intersects with other forms of discriminations. And the second important area is technology, seen as a tool that needs to be properly harnessed for flourishing, inclusive, and sustainable future. UNESCO has also prepared a video for the initiative, which all our viewers can access using the link just shared in the chat box. Abhinav Kumar, our colleague, can paste this link in the chat box. May I request Abhinav to kindly do the same. About the webinar, the main focus of the webinar is on future of education and knowledge economy, with emphasis on Sri Lanka and the South Asian region. The discussion aims to address the expectations and the learning outcomes of education for a knowledge economy in the 21st century. The key points for discussion and takeaways from this webinar will include the academic nature of education, increasing gaps between the skills that the youth have versus those that the industry demands, challenges in reforming education to a skill-based education system with a special focus on Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and Nepal. Strong, continuing, and consistent policy commitments to education on the part of the state. I conclude, as humanity looks for ways to transform the world for the better after the worst health crisis in a century, we must rethink social policies, including education, and address long-standing issues of structural inequality, poverty, and exclusion. We have opportunities to strengthen global common goods, protect and advance public education, and put knowledge and learning in the service of alternative futures for humanity and the planet. I hope our webinar today with informed dialogue will lead to the development of local alliances, innovation, and generation of locally situated situations. Let us think together today so we can act together to make the future we want. With this, I conclude, and I would like to now call upon our dear colleague who provides us support all the way from Sri Lanka, the esteemed, to introduce the esteemed panel members. Please welcome Ms. Himali Jinadasa. Thank you.
Thank you, Huma. Hello, everybody. It is a great honor for me to introduce the members of our eminent panel. Key speaker, Dr. Upali Sedara, is the Senior Advisor to the Minister of Education, Government of Sri Lanka, the Rector and CEO of Sri Lanka International Buddhist Academy, SIVA in Kandy, and the Team Leader of Sri Lanka's Educational Reforms Task Force. A distinguished academic in this area, Dr. Sedara has published several well-recognized books. Globalization and Educational Reforms, The Crisis of Vision, which incidentally can be found on the UNESCO website, and Education Meeting Knowledge Economy is a textbook currently used in over 50 universities in the US. His experience is in a multiple of sectors: health, education, child psychology, agriculture, economics, and public sector expenditures. focusing on reforming education for the 21st century. The next speaker to be introduced is Dr. Punchi Nilime Megaswatha, the General Secretary of the Sri Lanka National Commission for UNESCO, which is a co-partner for this webinar. He is also a senior visiting lecturer on mass media at the Universities of Colombo and Sri Jayawardenepura, and also a member of the Educational Reforms Task Force for Sri Lanka. Last and definitely not the least is Dr. Mansoor Ahmed, joining us from Dhaka. I also take this opportunity to welcome our many participants listening in from Bangladesh, Shagota. Dr. Mansoor Ahmed is Professor Emeritus of the BRAC University Institute of Educational Development in Dhaka, of which he is the founder director. He has been chair of the Bangladesh Early Childhood Development Network and convener of Education Watch Bangladesh. Dr. Mansoor was also former UNICEF Senior Education Advisor and UNICEF Country Director in China, Ethiopia, and Japan. Let me also introduce my colleague Omar Diop, our Chief of Education at the UNESCO New Delhi Cluster Office and the initiator of this series of webinars on the futures of education, who will be providing the closing comments. I also take the pleasure of introducing Tarush Jain, who has been working tirelessly with the UNESCO team behind the scenes to organize this webinar. The founder of BrainWiz, which is also a co-organizer of this event. He is our moderator today. Over to you, Tarush.
Thank you, Himali. Thank you for that generous introduction. And I feel that we have all worked together for this webinar. So thank you so much for that. I take this opportunity to invite everyone to post their questions that they might have from whatever our speakers talk about today in the chat section. We will be very happy to make them a part of this particular conversation today. We are also inviting questions on Twitter. You can use the hashtag Futures of Education and hashtag South Asia to post your questions on Twitter. And we have a team of people who are constantly checking those messages on Twitter, and we'll be very happy to make those questions a part of today's conversation as well. At this point, Dr. Sedra, thank you so much for joining us. I would like to take this opportunity to open this conversation with you. You are an expert of knowledge economies, and you're also a senior advisor to the government of Sri Lanka. You have published many books, and one of those books specifically talks about knowledge economy. For many who might be present here, some could be engineers like me who do not know the concept of knowledge economies. Can you please tell us what is a knowledge economy, what drives a knowledge economy, and in situations like these, when everything is shut down.
What is his name?
Hello, sir, can you hear me?
Dr. Sedri, you're on mute. If you could please unmute. Thank you so much.
Hello.
Thank
Do
you.
you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Let me first thank UNESCO Sri Lanka National Office as well as the New Delhi office for taking this initiative to have this webinar today on this very important topic for not only for South Asia, in general for many countries. You asked me the question that, what do you mean by knowledge economy?
Yes.
Because this is a fundamental question. Of course, education had been always looking for knowledge. Education was always giving knowledge. That was the understanding of sending children to school, was to learn and gather knowledge. However, the world was evolving on economic thoughts since Adam Smith, and then classical economic theories, neoclassical economic theories to knowledge economy. Now, the leader is actually the Dr. Romer from Stanford University. He is the actually speaking, the father of knowledge economy in a way, because he has written so much on it. What do you mean by knowledge economy is, when you look at the industries those days, we had the various factors of production. But today, in those factors of production, in the factors of productions, those two
Yes, sir.
The factors of production those days that we talked about were more basically land, raw material, and capital, and things. But you see, today we are talking not that those factors are not necessary, but today for all production, goods and services need are knowledge-intensive productions, knowledge-intensive services. This is the basic difference. Why knowledge-intensive in the sense? Now, we should take, for instance, take a simple example. Now, in South Asia, one of the biggest industries we have is garments. We should take Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or India. Garments is one of the large industries. We know that how, if you look at the garment industry, those days we had all manual skills, the cutting the material, stitching the material, all done in a very manual way. Today it has got highly intensified with knowledge, and actually when you tailor clothes to a market, it comes in all the technical details. If you look at the garment industry, you will see that you know what design, what material, how to cut it, and what is how much of the precise measurements that it needs. All these things are highly specialized and also indicated, and you are expected to produce the garment according to those specifications. That is where the knowledge intensity has come. You also said what drives the knowledge economy. Earlier we were learning in schools. You remember in 1980s, particularly 60s, 70s, particularly 1980s, World Development Report of the World Bank talked about human resource development. So the education was to develop human resources. Today it has turned to a different situation. We are today talking about human capital. What do you mean by human capital? Earlier we call capital for money, because that can be directly used in industry for production or services. Now, human capital means the humans that we hire should be able to directly utilize for various services or production purposes. Then there are the three driving forces is actually, first driving force is the knowledge. It is not the same knowledge that we were talking earlier. In earlier education, or for that matter in South Asia, today our school education is called explicit knowledge-based education. Explicit knowledge is, we are trying to teach the children what is known. Explain knowledge. Those things are already in textbooks. This explain knowledge, people learn, and even our examination, what we try to assess is the explain knowledge. Everything that is in the textbook, teacher teaches the textbook as a lesson, and then eventually examiners examine whether he or she has learned the lesson. So that explained knowledge goes one step beyond that in a knowledge economy. Today we are talking of deepening knowledge. What do you mean by deepening knowledge? Deepening of knowledge doesn't happen. Today actually what happens, actually a lot of students think to deepen knowledge, what they do is go from one tutor to another. The coaching has become a vehicle of deepening knowledge, but it really does not deepen knowledge. Deepening knowledge here means knowledge that you learned has to put to practice. So it is through practice only knowledge get deepened. Children or the learner understands knowledge deeper by doing things. So deepening knowledge is driving force in knowledge economy. Second thing is that I said we are teaching things that we already know. Explain knowledge, explicit knowledge. Knowledge economy is driving behind implicit knowledge. What is implicit knowledge? Implicit knowledge means unexplained knowledge. Any good person who works in the industry or in any services, they always have clues. They always have new thinking in their heads that might do things differently. these insights, these new ideas have to drive the knowledge economy. Those are there is no textbook for that. There is no explained knowledge behind clues. When you have a clue, a person tries to take a lot of risk. He doesn't know whether it works or not for him, but still they do it. This is the entrepreneurship that most of the entrepreneurs have to take. This is the risk-taking ability of the person. Usually, inventor, innovators, they take a lot of risk because they modify things or they manufacture things just to try out their idea. So the knowledge economy goes behind that. The third important driving force in knowledge economy is actually technology, particularly information technology. Now we already know we are in the fourth industrial revolution. From these days we talk industrial revolution. That is actually goes beyond information technology, robotics, artificial intelligence, big data, cyber security, and that kind of thing. The internet itself and the World Wide Web has taught us a lot of new things. Learning has become different. Searching information, searching for knowledge has become a different game. Then surfing has become the tool of learning. Then storing knowledge has become different. So these developments have given the nature of knowledge has become different. So these driving forces, particularly information technology and the new trend of robotics, artificial intelligence, those will govern the industry in future. So without these fundamentals, most of the human capital will not be of much use. Actually, a recent global report shows that nearly 80% of the present youth, if they receive the same kind of education that we are getting today, they will be of redundant in the work in the coming years. You are clear on what I said. Let me close it here, because the issue is actually when you know these things, the fourth industrial revolution, all these things, there are new developments in education. These go hand in hand with other developments. I said in place of human resources, we are going to human capital now. The learning was basically regarded as IQ, because person's intelligence was taught as the most important thing for learning. Today, I'm not saying, or the literature does not say IQ is not important. More than IQ today, people have found in research for the success of person, EQ, the emotional development, emotional quotient, is more important as important as IQ. Then earlier we were thinking of transferring of knowledge. Today we are talking of transferring of skills. Then I also mentioned the education earlier was looking for explicit knowledge. Today we are talking for implicit knowledge. So these concepts are clear, but what matters is really for us, how can we change the present conventional education system to meet these new demands in the world? This is the key question for today's discussion. Thank you for this moment.
Thank you so much, sir. I think that did help us develop some understanding about knowledge economies as such. I think the point that you mentioned in the end, that how should we go about this webinar, that is exactly how we are going about it. We also focus on addressing some of these key issues. But before we actually go there, Dr. Manzoor, thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Saidra mentioned that education has to power knowledge economies. And you have immense experience of working in the education sector and in the knowledge economy. can you also put some light on how can education actually go on strengthening the knowledge economy of the country, especially in times like these when everything is shut down? Do you see knowledge economies actually contributing to a country's economy as such?
Thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this. Greetings from Bangladesh to all the participants. I agree with everything that Dr. Sedere mentioned about the nature of the knowledge economy and the challenges we have. But I would like to broaden the perspective a little bit. I would like to make 3 quick points. First of all, if we just focus on knowledge economy in a somewhat narrow sense, then it may become a limiting perspective. Let me explain why. We have the SDG 2030 vision of development and SDG 4, and there are 5 pillars of development that they talk about. The 5 P's: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. These are the kinds of 5 defining themes for SDG, for future development, the kind of world we want to build, societies we want to build. So I think the first point is that if we talk about knowledge economy, which is very important, that may only relate to one of these 5, which is prosperity. People, planet, participation, peace, all these other perspectives also have to be brought in. That's what our learning and education has to serve. I'm sure Dr. Sedere will agree with me, but knowledge economy, commonly understood, and if we focus on that, that can be limiting. Okay, we can talk more about it. And second point I'd like to make, as the director of UNESCO was saying, the COVID pandemic, this is the big elephant in the room today. And it is not something temporary. It's not something that is going away and we are going to, the implications and the impact of it is not going away quickly, probably never. And we are going to live with it. And there are longer term implications of it for learning and for education. It has, in fact, this pandemic has kind of brought out, bared the limitations, vulnerabilities of our education system, of our development ideas and development kind of vision. So we have to consider what it means, in the longer term, dealing with it immediately in longer term, because we are at a risk of losing a lot of the educational gains that we have achieved in recent years with this onslaught of this pandemic globally and particularly in South Asia. So this is another point we need to consider as we look to the future, actually futures of education. I think the plural definition of plural terminology is very important because we are not talking about one future for all, but the multiple futures and also, different futures. And the third point I'd like to make is that to bring about the change and transformation we would like to achieve through this educational development, learning, and indeed through knowledge economy, is that we have to begin where we start. In South Asia particularly, we talk about 4th Industrial Revolution and the 21st century skills and all that, but maybe majority of our people are still in the maybe 2nd Industrial Revolution, or maybe in the 19th century environment, or maybe 3rd Industrial Revolution. Of course, some of our people, some of the more fortunate ones are participating in what is called the 4th Industrial Revolution, but the majority are not there yet. And that is a challenge, how we move forward with the whole society, taking all together. And so as we talk about the knowledge economy and the development of education and 21st century skills, we have to think of the larger picture, where we are and how do we move forward, taking all with us, and rather than widening the gap and disparities that we already have in our societies. So these are kind of challenges. So I want to share this as a kind of backdrop for our discussion as we go along. So let me stop now and then come back later. Over to Tarush.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed. For general understanding of the audience, I would like to tell them that from here on, we are going to have a discussion on a few questions that we received from the audience as a part of the registration process. We received around 300 questions, and we had to go through all of them. And then there were certain themes that emerged out of those questions. And we were so surprised to see how many people really wanted to talk about themes like online education, the existence of skill gap, education for the 21st century as such. You also mentioned 21st century skills and probably some other competencies that the learners would require in this era. And then, of course, the reforms and actions that governments across the world and multilateral agencies like the UN can take up. So from here on, what we will do is we will take up each of these themes, and I'm sure that you will be able to share your thoughts on each of these themes, certain questions that we have received from people. Also, I would invite everyone, if they have any questions regarding what the speakers are mentioning, you are welcome to post those questions on the chat section. We are constantly going through that. We also invite questions on Twitter with the hashtag Futures of Education, hashtag South Asia. You can also tag UNESCO New Delhi in your tweets so that we are easily able to track them. But moving on from here, I think one general sense that prevails across everyone is that online education seems to be the answer to everything. I don't know if it's a response to the situation that we are in, or we actually are relying so much on online education being able to solve these questions for us. Dr. Meghaswat, I would like to draw you into the discussion here and take some views from you on how online education can define the new system of education for countries in our region, in the region of South Asia.
Yeah, thank you and welcome to all the members, and thank you very much for the organizers of the webinar. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I think before I answer to that question, I would just like to mention what Dr. Saidara has pointed out about the human capital, right?
Sure, sir.
And the learning outcome is the most important thing in this entire process. And the ultimate expectation is to enhance the human capital. And when you say human capital, and you have to enhance the productivity of the person, the skill of the person, things like that. And when you say this human capital need to be embodied with employability and successful living. Those are the two main areas, employability and successful living. And I will answer to your direct question on online, but first I want to just emphasize on this matter, that is our learning outcomes. That's the most important thing. The learning outcome should be employability and successful living. And when you say that, successful living, it has some, we have to develop skills among the children. How can we do this? Now, the social and emotional competence is the essential basis of successful living. In home, in the working place, and in the society. And these are the three areas that we are living. In your home, in your workplace, and in society. So the essential basis of successful living in all these three areas, we have to develop certain skills. Let me spell out a few of these things, right? Say, for example, family friendly. The person must be family friendly. And number two, civic competence has to be developed. And responsible and accountable. and also physical and mental fitness and global systems. Things are like that. These are few skills that we have to develop in this social and emotional intelligence area. That is number one for successful living. And also, I mentioned about the employability. And employability depends on certain set of skills. Again, I would like to just spell a few of them. Say, oriented to world of work. There must be, now in business, we know market orientation is extremely important. Similarly, in this case, employability of a student, of a child, orientation of world of work is very important. And number two, higher order thinking skills have to be developed. Number three, IT-based technology skills have to be developed. And high on psychomotor skills and high entrepreneurship. These are few of the skills that we see through employability, skills. And I mentioned about two things, that is employability and social living. But there's another thing in our education. In our education, we have to develop to meet the 21st century challenges or to develop the human capital. There's a third component, a third domain, I may spell, that is the generic skills. We have to develop the generic skills of the student population. Again, I will spell out few skills under generic skills. For example, effective and efficient use of language. This is an extremely important thing. Language is extremely important, especially effective and efficient use of language is important. That is one generic skill. And also effective use of mathematical or mathematic concepts. This is also important in generic skills in life. And also critical thinking skills. Now this is another area. The students should be able to think critically, deeply. The deeply thinking is extremely vital. In other words, we can call it critical thinking skills. And also collaborative skills, another area. The collaborative skills also have to be developed under generic skills. And I will spell one only again, that is able to transfer learning and skills. This is another important thing. We must be able to transfer the knowledge into skills. So these are coming under generic skills. So I spelled now three main areas or three main domains. That is the social and emotional intelligence area, and also the employability area and generic skills. And there's another area that is actually now I just want to at this moment to show this book. This is called Education Meeting Knowledge Economy. It's a wonderful book. And if anybody can read this, you will understand the entire education reforms in this book. They're written by our Sri Lankan expert in education, Dr. Upali Sedara. I must thank him in writing this book. I think it needs about 10 to 15 years to write a book like this. It's an extremely important and nice book. Explain everything, knowledge economy and all these authentic learning system, authentic instruction system, and authentic assessment systems are being given in this book. So please, if you can read this book, then you will learn many more concepts in education, especially to meet the 21st century challenges among the children. And I just want to say another area that is now the entire world, we have to preserve the environment. In other words, the children should be protector of environment. And they must be able to protect, they must be able to identify the destructions of environment. So now we know this, even in COVID-19 situation, environment is extremely vital. So the students must be able to learn and understand about the environment. In other words, eco-friendly child we have to build in this future education, eco-friendly child. So in other words, they should learn about environment. They should be, they should learn more about environment, to preserve the environment, to protect the environment. This is another area. And also, finally, I like to say we can call it eco-friendly person we have to develop, and therefore in that area, green consumer skills has to be developed, and also personal and environment health conscious has to be developed. So these are things that we have to develop under the new education reforms. And you asked a question about the online. Now, actually, online is also we can use that only to gain the knowledge, but not the implicit knowledge. It is the explicit knowledge which Dr. Sedra has pointed out. Explicit knowledge, yes, you can use through knowledge. But when you come to the emotional intelligence, social intelligence, employability skills, generic skills, I think online will not help much. So there are two sides to that. So therefore, online is important, but the other parts, the other concepts, the other skills have to be developed. So anyway, thank you very much in organizing this webinar. And also we must thank all the 300 odd people who have joined this. We can understand how important, and they are so keen to develop and to understand about the education. So, and again, I wish and I want to thank all the people who have organized this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meghaswat. I think you also addressed a question that I had for Dr. Ahmed after this. You listed out a long list of skills that one needs to survive in this era. And Dr. Ahmed, I would like to ask you, while Dr. Meghaswat feels that online education is there only for explicit knowledge, do you personally feel that we can also evolve our societies in a way where they can continue or they can start to learn society skills that Dr. Meghaswat mentioned, or employability skills that Dr. Meghaswat mentioned through online means? Do you feel that online education can evolve to actually deliver skills that are needed for the 21st century?
Indeed, it can. I think I share Dr. Meghaswat's little skepticism about how it can work. He has mentioned a lot of important objectives that have to be served by learning, and he is not sure if online techniques can achieve that. And I would agree with him. Actually, I would say that there is much hype about online and edtech so far with very limited results, particularly in our part of the world. And mainly because the digital resources and digital technologies are not really available to majority of our learners and students or our people. Even you have a penetration of mobile phone and so on, but actually, broadband internet and smartphone, which can be used for actual learning purposes, that reach is very, very small, very limited. And what is happening now, it is actually creating a new kind of digital divide, because technology, educational technology and ICT is a tremendous resource. There is tremendous store of knowledge. You can get almost everything you need from there. And it can help in just, factual information and knowledge and skills, and also in terms of social, emotional intelligence development. You can learn about many things. But who can learn these things? It's only those who are already tech savvy, or those who are from better off families where they can get the support from their parents or have the hardware and the ability to reach out to these resources. And the vast majority of our learners, of our people, are not able to access these resources. So the potential is great. I think if this pandemic, this particular situation has drawn attention to, the possibilities here and how we should try to make use of it. And even just this meeting that we are having now through this virtual meeting, it is we probably didn't think of it earlier as a common way of meeting, but now this may become the new normal in the future. So, but for our majority of our learners in our part of the world, it is not so. In Bangladesh, for example, only about 5% of the young people, students, can have some sort of broadband access with smartphone or laptop and so on. So 95% are left out. But there are a few small minority, those who are in English medium schools and more prestigious schools and so on, and in private universities, mostly not in public universities, in private universities, they are taking advantage of this online education. So what I'd like to say very quickly, that there has to be a real serious proactive policy on the part of educational policymakers and proactive priority action to, first of all, to make the education workforce, the teachers and people with some technology knowledge bringing into the education workforce to become kind of mediator between the internet resources and the ordinary students in schools and in colleges and people who are not making use of these things. Secondly, there has to be a huge priority on building up the infrastructure, the connectivity, availability of the hardware for the common people, broadband, internet. I mean, it is the national regulatory agencies and the large ICT providers and ICT companies and so on should come together and make every institution, every educational institution, a free Wi-Fi hotspot. It can be done if the government and the people come together, or the private sector come together. And then thirdly, I think we need also the content adapted for this purpose. Everything is available in the internet, all domains of knowledge, and in English. Now that cuts out the majority of the population. So can we adapt this material to our local languages and also adapt this, link it up and make them in sync with our curriculum, school curriculum and so on, because people still have to follow the curriculum and sit for the exams and so on, and they have to prepare accordingly. And so help both students and teachers to access these resources, the content and also the connectivity, and also the teachers themselves and the education workforce need to be taught in a different way. And there have to be more people who can provide the technological support to the students in the schools, in the colleges, and become the mediator between the internet resources and the students themselves. So with these kinds of steps taken, I think it can be a tremendous tool for learning, including building the knowledge economy and other kinds of goals that we were talking about and Dr. Magasate was talking about, so important to build the human capital. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed. I think you also have drawn my attention to a very important question that I had for Dr. Sedra here. You mentioned that accessibility and inclusivity are going to be major challenges as we go ahead.
Right.
Yes, we already see that there is a divide developing between the learners who are able to learn online versus those who are not able to access those resources. And hence, probably in a few decades, this problem will get highlighted further. Dr. Sedra, I would like to ask you, you work very closely with the government of Sri Lanka and the education department. I have a two-part question for you. One is, how does the government of any country, not Sri Lanka only, but any country, address this particular issue? Do they solve this problem for today, or they solve this problem for, say, 2050? And secondly, in times like COVID-19, where a lot of government response is towards developing good infrastructure in health, probably strengthening the societies, helping those who do not have basic amenities, how do the governments actually focus on developing infrastructure to provide online education, or just to provide digital connectivity to everyone?
Tarush, thank you. I think it's a very, very serious question for any country. Maybe in developed countries the situation is different, but Tarus, perhaps you may not know, I have worked in all South Asian countries long time. In Bangladesh, I have been working. If I actually, Dr. Manzoor knows that. The same in India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka. So I know the situation in South Asia quite well, as much as I know about Sri Lanka. Now, if you take the Sri Lankan case, right now, I totally agree with Dr. Manzoor Ahmed's comments, as previous comments as well. Also, Dr. Meghaswat's comments. We are also having the same way. Now, when it comes to online learning, you need several things. A lot of people think, it's a matter of having a learning platform. Now, for instance, I mean, if you take my own campus where I am the Vice Chancellor, I had the online learning platform with Moodle systems for the last 3.5 years. And all our undergraduates were on that platform. But at the same time, we also get some students on the loan scheme from the government. And they are coming from different backgrounds than those who are coming to ready to pay fees. Now, I see the digital divide even on my own campus students. When I have gone online teaching now under the COVID crisis situation, I see that most of the students who are coming with loan scheme, they do not have laptops, they do not have connectivity at home, good. So they are kind of kept out of the process. Now, online learning, I quite agree with what Dr. Meghaswat said. Very difficult to develop, education does not mean just knowledge economy and the skills. When you say skills, it has a lot of cultural competencies, there are religious competencies, there are many other competencies under the skills umbrella, not just the employable skills. For to be a successful human being in society and for the global citizenship, to save the planet, for the sustainable goals, we need various range of skills. This is very well, if you look at my book also, I have gone into all these skills as well. Now, online learning had been working quite well for us when we have the blended mode. Certain things we do online, then certain things we do face-to-face or giving assignments and allowing the child to go to the workplace or office or in school, community, and do most of the other practical work, project work in the society or in the industry or wherever it is necessary. So the skills were enhanced from both sides. The classroom teaching mode was partly is the one which was covered by online learning. Online learning, now if you take Sri Lanka for instance, right now under the COVID situation, our Ministry of Education has been trying to go online as much as possible. We are this is a good thing to have. Sri Lanka has a small population. When you look at Bangladesh, has 19 million children in primary schools. Alone, Sri Lanka has only 22 million in the whole country. We have only 4 million children. So with that, and also our per capita income is supposed to be much higher than in the other countries. But yet, only 23% of our households got a laptop or a desktop or a smartphone. This is the recent household survey. So all this online thing we are talking about is 23% of the population. There is a clear digital divide, which of course is clearly articulated in many places, not only in Sri Lanka, worldwide. This digital divide is there. Then what happened? Our president was very sensitive to this. Actually, before the COVID-19 issue, 2 weeks before that, our president had a review meeting, which I attended also. He pointed out very clearly that this online business, not all children can reach. Television is much more better for children because at least over 90% of the children do have access to a television. So actually, he wanted us to develop programs through television teaching, not just to as a supplementary teaching tool to school education. COVID has now shut down all schools for the last 2.5 months. And we are very hopeful in Sri Lanka. Perhaps in another 2 to 3 weeks' time, we will open up most of the schools, at least in the rural sector. Because our COVID situation has come to a very good control. There is not a single new case has been added from the society side. Whatever we have got, it is all coming from foreign elements, and we know exactly where the disease is. So that is a fortunate situation. We are perhaps now rated as #1 in the world as the best controlled country. That is because of our health system is, as much as our education is good, actually health system is good. But still, I believe personally, we have to learn to live with the virus. You remember the world history has Spanish flu. People say 3 million died in Spanish flu. Of course, we didn't have the technology to show each country's death. Today, this virus is somewhat similar to that or more dangerous than that. Future, we can expect even bigger ones. But whatever said and done, we have to develop new health skills for children. These are new ways of living. Doesn't mean that, I don't think that's easy for South Asia particularly, or for that matter, any country, to replace or to, in place of the formal school, to bring some other alternative mechanism so quickly is very, very difficult. We are also thinking in Sri Lanka, loudly thinking, to go from textbook culture to give a laptop, interactive learning to every child in the next 5-10 years time. That has been our prospective plan. But still, our thinking is not to rule out the school. This is to actually, in addition to the school learning, how we can enhance the skills, particularly technological skills, IT skills, and also take the digital divide away. Because Sri Lanka, when it comes to disparities, I think we are one of the better countries. We have only 4% poverty in Sri Lanka compared to in other places. So we have a little bit better social equity, but not to that level. I always see the inequity is bigger than the equity in the distribution of teachers, resources, and quality of schools and things like that. So under that context, actually, I would like to show Tarus some of the things that I have seen in a recent report in India as well as the World Bank report, that conventional education is still not serving, as Dr. Mansoor said. They are still in the second industrial revolution, or not even in the third, because even still in India or Bangladesh, Nepal, literacy is an issue. How to give basic literacy. The recent World Bank report shows that India in the rural sector, second grade children, they can only read, 80% could not read a single word. And I was shocked to see that, because this is a recent report. Same thing was said about mathematics. So these basic skills are not given. How can we think of going for online learning for the entire country? Yes, as Dr. Mansoor says, it works for the elites, more affluent communities, but not for the marginalized population.
Hello. I think we lost your audio, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now let me finish there, and then we can go on to other questions.
All right. Thank you so much. Dr. Meghaswat, we have spoken a little about online education and the skills that it is able and not able to provide. Talking specifically about knowledge economies, I put this question to you because you were the first to bring up the topic of skills in this conversation. When we say that there is a huge skill gap that exists between what the industry needs right now and what our education systems are able to provide, you specifically mentioned the skills in 3 particular categories, one for the society and one for employability and one set of generic skills. If we focus on employability skills a little here, could you please explain to all of us what are the skills that the industry will now look forward to in the new set of employees, specifically after COVID-19 crisis? Skills that our education system fails to address right now, but will become really important in times to come.
Yeah, I think number one is the health practices. The new health practices, new way of communicating with people, new way of associating with people, and also even inside the industries or any other place, the placing of the people, the working pattern, all this had to be changed because of COVID-19. I think this is the main thing in the new employability skills. So I think even during the school days, the children should be learned, and they must enhance these skills when they go to the society. That is number one. And actually, when you say the employability, the higher order thinking skills is another, I mentioned earlier, higher order thinking skills. The children, when they go to the employment, the higher order thinking is extremely vital. And also remember, they have to learn their managerial skills, their economic skills, those type of skills also they have to learn. Now, when you say managerial skills, there are so many things in managerial skills, the leadership quality, teamwork, things like those. So I think the school curriculum should be able to include all these things. So then when the child goes out of the school and when they come to the world of work or the employability, and he is ready, especially with the new situation, the health hazards, the way that the culture, a new culture, they have to build up in the living culture. So these are the things that I can explain, Tarush. Yes, Tarush.
Yes, thank you so much, sir. Dr. Ahmed, taking ahead from what Dr. Meghaswat had to mention about the skills that you need in the society, I think because our societies are also evolving now, I think the basic sense of citizenry might change. Do you think that we will also need new skills to just live in the society now, especially post-COVID-19 crisis? And please allow me to add another part to this question, and then you can take them up together. We see that a lot of people are not able to cope so well with this current situation, and we received a number of questions around this. What do you see can address the mental health of people in situations like these? And how can education systems respond to such a need? Dr. Ahmed?
Okay, thank you. In terms of skills for the employment market and other kinds of skills for, skills for life and livelihood, both are needed. And the learning system, education system are supposed to provide these skills. Now, what we hear commonly, refrain coming up all the time, that the employers don't get the people they need with the right kind of skills. And at the same time, a lot of young people are walking around without employment. So there is a mismatch, obviously. Now, what is the nature of this mismatch? Is the education system responsible for creating the mismatch? It seems that the education system or schools get blamed for not doing a good job and not creating the people for employment. I believe that this is somewhat unfair. I think the employers, the industries, the employment market is also in a flux. It's changing. It requires new kinds of, the nature of work itself is changing, and technologies are changing and so on. Even in the informal economy, which is not the organized sector, which is most of our people, maybe 80% of our people are in the so-called informal economy, which is supposed to be basically low skills and low kind of earning, low productivity. But even these are changing. And so can the education system prepare people for all these different kinds of skills that are needed in the market? That is a question we need to ask. I think we have to conceptualize the skills gap a little differently. There is the basic skills, competencies that people have to learn. As Magasatya was mentioning, they have to be able to read and write and think and understand some basic science and have some generic people skills, soft skills. These are things that they have to acquire. And basically, education system has to give these competencies. But can they prepare people for all the specific job slots that are there in the market? That's probably asking for too much. There has to be a kind of transition between the school education, basic general education and so on, and then preparing people for the specific job market and employment market. And there, I think the employers and the industries and the service sector, they also have a responsibility. They have to try to do something to induct and orient and help their new employees to get into the specific jobs. They have to work on that. And perhaps the government and the training providers of all kinds, technical, vocational, and the industry and the employers, they need to work together to see how this transition can be managed better so that people can be prepared and slotted into those jobs that are opening up. And these have to be a flexible approach, and these have to be probably more decentralized in the local circumstances, in the local economy, and in the informal sector. What are the requirements there? So we have to look at it this way. Can the schools prepare people with the basic competencies of communication, of thinking, of writing, of math and language, and also the generic discipline and working in a team and so on, soft skills. So that is what the schools should do. And there we are not doing a very good job. And we need to do better, in terms of the quality and relevance of our education system. How do we do better in that respect? And we should concentrate in general education in that area, and there is much to be done there. And then the young people can be prepared to move into the world of work with a little bit of transitional help, with short training and orientation and induction, and their industry and the government and other training providers, private sector should work together. So if we can look at it that way, then I think the skill gap can be better understood, and the gap can be breached better. So this is my own take on this. And here we are not working. Usually what we say, that we need to give more vocational skills. We need to vocationalize secondary education, higher secondary colleges. They should have just vocational courses and so on. We can never quite fit all the jobs that are opening up, and this is all the time changing. And thinking of the school system and education system providing for those specific slots, it never can happen. So it's the general preparedness, competencies, adaptability of young people, and then a transition where we need more creative work there, and we need to have some, lot more needs to be there. Some initiatives are being taken with some success. Dr. Sedere knows something in Bangladesh called Underprivileged Children's Education Program, USEP, which has these kinds of skills, short training specifically for the employment market, that they work with the employers. So more of this, I'm sure in other countries also we have these things, but give more attention to these and how we prepare them for the job market. So if this is the approach we take, then we may be better off in thinking about the skill gap and meeting the skill gap.
No, thank you so much, sir. I think you also addressed a very, very important question that I was coming to in my next section, and that was directed for Dr. Sedra, again, because he works so closely with the government. But I already have your views on it, and I think they are very, very important again. Dr. Sedra, we have to now reimagine education as everyone believes, be it because of the skills or the competencies or just because the nature of the societies is changing. Who do you think should initiate these reforms, or who takes the lead on these reforms? Is it the responsibility of the state, or is it the responsibility of multilateral organizations like the UN itself, or probably the corporate sector that is the end beneficiary of a workforce that we are able to create? And my second question, if you could also take it ahead from there, is that how do you see education reforming from here? What reforms do you think you would suggest for the education sector so that we are able to work positively after what we are seeing right now?
Thank you, Tarush. Actually, I think this is the most critical question. Actually, we all know theory. We also know, shortcomings in the present system and what we want, but we have a problem of how to get it done. Now, I always look at Thomas Edison, who was a school dropout, who was actually removed from school, repeatedly asked, teachers asked to remove him from school, and the mother finally took him out. But finally, Thomas Edison, what we are using this technology today, all thanks to Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison had 1,067 patents, highest number of patents in the world. Similarly, Henry Ford, if you take the motor industry, the trillion dollar motor industry, Henry Ford's story is the same. He was a school dropout. He was, while cutting wheat with the father, he imagined how to do things differently. Even Charlie Chaplin was a school dropout. That is why you see your past president, Honorable Abdul Kalam said, the best brains of the nation may be found on the last benches of the classroom. You see, these are not just statements. There are lots of, the similarly Rich Dad in Japan has written a book, why A-grade students work for C-grade students. Because finally, actually in the world, all industrialists will, including Bill Gates, was a university dropout. His story. Then Jack Ma, the richest man in China today, his story. All these stories we hear, but what have we done in educational reforms to do things other way? Now, Dr. Manzoor mentioned about USEP program, underprivileged urban children's program in Dhaka. I have seen that, I have evaluated that. Similar program we have in Sri Lanka, where most of the school dropout street children go for with a NGO run by a Buddhist priest, and I have seen them. Say, for instance, just give an example: the learning air condition repairing, air conditioning, cleaning up, tuning, and all those things. And this illiterate boy maintains the job card in English. You see, after 2 years training, he actually goes to big firms to maintain their conditioning systems. Does all the work, not only in Sinhala, also in English. The capacity is there in children. The skills are, there is no skill gap in the world. That is, again, a hypothetical situation about the skills. You see, children from small days are skilled. A small child, when they play with a toy, for instance, you see we are still, our education system is on old Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy is 60 years old now. The new taxonomy by Anderson in 2001, you can see that, you see what Dr. Mika said, higher order thinking is needed. In this one, you have the lower, Bloom's taxonomy is still in school used for very lower order knowledge. Higher order thinking, you can see how this system works. A child plays with a small toy for a while, sees very carefully what is happening. Then after a while, when the mother comes, you find the child has opened up the toy. So what is it? Actually his curiosity. So then he breaks it. Then he thinks that he can fix it back. Now, for instance, how can you do it?
You don't want it.
No, I want it. No, not the no, it's okay. So the child breaks the toy. Next time, the child wants to assemble the toy. He tries to assemble it. Sometimes the child can do it. All depends on the toys. Now, if you take a Lego set, where most of the flexible toys are, child can make it. After that, child assembles it. After a while, he started constructing new things. So this is the kind of skill the child always demonstrates. And these skills are very much used in preschool, primary school, grade 1 and 2. Children dance, children do things. But as we go up, we forget that and we go into the academic learning of things and we kill the skills. So what we can do now, for instance, if you take the child who cannot read one word in the rural sector in India, when we say, we are also looking at this problem from a wrong angle. We are looking from our academic eyes. We believe this is the way to teach. This is the way to do it. We prepare books for them. They fail in the books that we write. It's not that they fail. They do not fail in their own way. Because a child who drops out of school finally becomes a mason. He drops out because he cannot do mathematics. The mason or the carpenter used mathematics all the time, but he doesn't call it mathematics. But he knows how to make the wall straight. He knows how to make it, what angle it has to take, how to measure it. All this practical knowledge is there. Skill gap is created by us. So education system has to change our way of preparing curriculum. This is what we are going to do in Sri Lanka in new curriculum reforms. We are going to get away from this 1 year teaching curriculum and we are going to cut down into smaller modular forms. And child will learn a module in an authentic way with actual practical skills by doing things, maybe with the parents, maybe at home, maybe with the group in the market, maybe go elsewhere. So we are trying to authenticate the learning system. Authenticate means to relate learning to real life. When you relate learning to real life, child doesn't learn in an artificial environment. Resource gap does not come. Today, the formal school has a huge resource gap. Better schools have resources, others don't have resources. But if you go to authentic learning, even the most rural child, if he learns in community, if he learns in the environment, if he learns at home, if he learns by doing things, perhaps he has a better laboratory to work than an urban child. So these are the small changes that we are trying to introduce, but very difficult to do because our curriculum experts, those who write books, they are all trained in the old model. They don't pursue the learning process in that manner. So we need to retrain them. We need to look at, see, the NGO sector has been a little bit more successful than the formal ministries. Of course, another question that you asked was whether it should be done by the ministry or it should be done by the state or it should be done by the corporate sector or the multinationals. No, we all should come together. We need all of them. See, if education is to relate to industry, we need industries to participate. You look at the American SCANS report. It came in the late 1990s. SCANS report is one of the best, where it says, tell the teachers, school principals, superintendents of schools to look outside the school wall. The life is outside the school wall. So the message is actually the American education to authenticate education and go to real life, real world of work to learn. So the child gets the right values, human values. Skills are collected by them. When you do that, what that Honorable Abdul Kalam said, the backbenchers come first. I have done 18 MSc theses in Sri Lanka on this topic, particularly in authentic learning and authentic and generic skills in the last 3-4 years. All theses show from the conventional model when a child learns, the normal curve that we usually talk in assessment is in the lower end of the scale. When you use authentic learning, the same backward children jump all the way up to the higher end of the scale because they are the skilled ones. So there is no skill gap. This is an artificially created formal education system has deprived the able children by giving our academic kind of education in place of skills-oriented education. Educational reforms in future for the 21st century has a bigger challenge to face. I will stop here for that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I think this was a very, very detailed description of how education systems have evolved and how and where we are right now. Thank you so much. At this point, I would like to thank all the panelists for joining us. I think we have received some amazing comments in the chat section and on Twitter. I would like to draw your attention to two contrasting views that we have received on Twitter and on the chat. While there is one person on Twitter who has asked that if we make the entire system online, if all the countries are able to achieve 100% effectiveness in digital learning and digital teaching and online education, can we think of or can we move towards a point where we can eliminate the role of educator from the society? While on the chat box, we have received a comment that says that why do we only focus on online education when we talk about transforming learning for the 21st century? So I think these are two contrasting views that I will request the speakers to consider. And to close this particular webinar for today, if the three speakers could one by one just briefly tell us how do they see education responding to what we need in the future, probably provide 1 or 2 steps of what we need to do and what is their vision for education to up to the year 2050. If we can start with Dr. Meghaswat.
Tarush. Yeah, thank you, Tarush. I think now online is a tool. Yes, we can use that, right? But remember, children are not robots. Children and we humans, we have to be with humans. So the most important thing is the emotional intelligence and the social intelligence components, social skills and emotional skills. Therefore, I feel more than online. Online is a tool only. It's like a book, right? But it's only a simple component. It is a minor component. As Dr. Sedara and Dr. Masood Ahmad very clearly explained, that we have to go from this knowledge, this explicit knowledge to implicit knowledge. In other words, we have to create a skill-oriented process. In other words, a performance-oriented education has to be put forward. Performance-oriented. That means any child in anywhere, in any time, in their life, he must be able to perform any activity effectively, efficiently, accurately. And this is called performance-oriented education. And for that, online only a minor component. This is what I feel personally. I strongly feel that. Online is again like a book. Again, it is in the explicit knowledge process. But we must go into the implicit knowledge process. In other words, skill-oriented process we have to go. And therefore, I strongly feel that the entire education system has, as Dr. Sedra pointed out, we have to have these reforms. In other words, relate learning to real life. In other words, authentic learning system is the answer.
So thank you so much, sir. I think you explained it well, and then you gave us a couple of keywords for this. We all have a takeaway from you. Dr. Ahmad, what are your thoughts on this? How do you see education responding to the changes, and what is your vision for education for the year 2050?
Okay, thank you. A lot could be said, but I would maybe emphasize one point. We have talked about many of our expectations about what kind of learning we want to have, what kind of future students, outputs of our education system, what skills and competencies they should acquire. So we are talking about all these goals and objectives that we want to achieve. But how? I think that's the critical question. And here, first of all, education as a public good, here, the government has the ultimate responsibility to really create the conditions so that the public good can be realized. And here, of course, private sectors and others should contribute, but within some ground rules which are commonly set for achieving those objectives. But one thing that maybe it's very complex and complicated, but what is the main sort of vehicle for bringing about the change and really achieving good learning outcomes? The tools of online, yes, but still we need the mediator of learning, the education workforce and teachers. They have to be in the middle between the knowledge and the students, and they have to work together to achieve the learning outcomes. So here, what kind of teachers we have in our systems? Are they the most competent, most capable, most qualified and well-supported, well-rewarded people in our systems? Probably not. I would say that we are not doing a very good job of really attracting talented people into the teaching profession and keeping them there. And here, I would like to make the point that in South Asia, particularly, we have a special problem. We have a general system here, including Sri Lanka, as far as I know, that people usually come from the university, undergraduate education on any subject, and then they become teachers, and they may have a short initial sort of teacher education, teacher training, or they may have afterwards, once they're employed, they go for training. And this sort of eliminates a lot of the talented people for whom, the talented people out of the colleges and universities, for whom teaching is not the first choice as a profession. They go for other things. And so from the kind of, I'm sorry to say this, kind of from the bottom of the graduates barrel, I think those who do not go for other professions, they come to teaching, and we are not attracting the right people. So what can we do about it? What other countries are doing, developed countries and East Asia and so on, is they look upon preparation of teachers as a longer kind of process, a 4-year program in the undergraduate education, along with other subjects. There's a concurrent approach, along with general education, whatever subject, arts, science, humanities, different subjects, social sciences they study. Along with that, they also study pedagogy and education. I mean, they choose this as a sort of major area. And so there is a 4-year period of induction, orientation, preparing them psychologically, emotionally, and for knowledge, and so on, preparing the teachers. And if we could get the more capable people after high school education, young people, into this kind of track for teachers, and then do a few other things. We have to show a good career path for teachers. We don't, in Bangladesh, for example, a teacher is employed as an assistant teacher, and most of them retire as assistant teacher. There is no career track, and I think this is somewhat similar in other countries. And the social esteem and recognition and rewards and incentives and professional performance standards, those are lacking. So if we could make some change there and find a way to prepare teachers professionally, support them, reward them, and change the whole kind of nature of teaching as a profession and get the most talented people and keep them there, then the quality and relevance of education can change, and we can see a qualitative change in our system and some of the objectives that we are talking about. I think it would be easier to achieve the 21st century challenges that we have to meet, and knowledge economy we have to build, and beyond knowledge economy, people with capable young people with ethical and moral orientation and values. Our teachers also have to absorb these and inculcate these. And how do we prepare these teachers with a moral compass for themselves to do their job? So that's in short, a kind of challenge we all have. And if we could focus on this, I think we can make a difference in our education systems.
Well, thank you so much, sir. That was a detailed description of what we need. And I think all of us have some key takeaways from this. I can assure you that we are working on building and strengthening the systems here, especially capacity building of institutions and teachers. And I'm sure that you must be doing the same with your institutions in Bangladesh. Dr. Meghaswat, at this point, since you work so closely with UNESCO, you're the Secretary General of UNESCO National Commission for Sri Lanka. I would like to have your opinion and final comments on the reforms that you see in the education sector that we need to have, and what is your vision for education in the year 2050, and not from a local perspective, but probably for a global audience that have joined the audience, the gathering today.
Yes, I think it is a very, very challenging task. It's not very easy. I can remember once the leader of China, Mao Zedong, said his biggest problem was handling teachers. So even in our South Asian countries, including Sri Lanka, I think we have to first educate the teachers. So teachers are the vehicle, or they are the people who can do this. So I think they are the most important people. So therefore, I think the first initiative should be we have to educate the teacher population. So that is number one. And then only we can go into the authentic learning system, authentic assessment system, authentic instructor system. So, but I think to develop our South Asian countries, to develop for economic development, this is extremely vital, going into this authentic learning system. In other words, going into the implicit knowledge process, going into the human capital process. The human capital. As I pointed out earlier, this performance-oriented education, people must be able to perform any activity efficiently and effectively. So this is the process that we should go into. And also, on the other hand, as Dr. Mansoor Ahmad pointed out, the values, the emotional intelligence component. We must be able to love the motherland. We must be able to help the others. We must be able to help all our people, the relations, the people, the entire people, and also the empathy component. Empathy component is also very important, and it will help the peace building among communities. We have to live together. All the communities live together. All the religions we have to respect. These values also has to be embedded into the future children of the entire Southeast Asia. Thank you very much, Tarush. Thank you very much for organizing everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I think I should thank all of you for joining us today and having this wonderful discussion on futures of education. We tried to address everything that the global audience could ask us. We also tried to include questions from Twitter and from chat, just to ensure that all that we are doing here is able to directly address the concerns that people have. At this point, I would like to request Omar to join us for this conversation. Omar, if I can please request you to turn your video on and join us for this conversation. I have one last question for you before we finally close this webinar. And that is that after listening to all the discussions that we have had today, what would you say are the 5 or 4 or 3 key takeaways for everyone after the webinar? How can we go and try to make individual changes in our societies? And also, since you are the Chief of Education for UNESCO for this cluster, you work with education systems very closely. you also see that, and Dr. Meghaswat has mentioned it a couple of times while he was talking, that our systems focus on academic skills, but they also focus on cultural values and religious values and general sense of living in the society. How do you see education addressing that? Omar, if we can have you.
Thank you, Tarush. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I would like to really congratulate and thank very much Dr. Sedere and Dr. Meghaswat, the Secretary General of the National Commission, and of course Dr. Mansour. I think the issues that were debated here were quite relevant to what we are going on now. The takeaways, I'm just going to structure them in four big things. So I'm going to think of the online education. The second one would be the existing skill gaps. Third one would be education for the 21st century skills. And then after all this will lead us to some kind of reforms and actions. I'm just trying to put it together so it is digest for the International Commission to have it as an input, because we are thinking of Horizon 2050. So from now to 2050, what do we need to do in order to reflect the futures of education? And if I take the first bucket, big bucket, which is dealing with the online education, what we've been hearing here is online education is good, okay, but is not good enough to replace how we were doing education before. It has a lot of limitations. When it comes to talk about, for example, empathy, how do you put it online? How do we also address the digital divide that is already there? Some people were excluded because they didn't have access to internet. They didn't have access to online learning solutions. So how do we make sure that we are inclusive and we don't exclude more those who are already excluded? So we've been hearing it in the debates. That's the takeaway. I think if I move to the second one, which is the existing skill gap. Now, this is a big chunk, and it took a good share of the debates. And I was at the same time reading the comments on the chat box. I think Manjula from the audience and then Divya from the audience, they have brought up some issues which were quite relevant. And Dr. Sedere spoke about how human resources are moving towards human capital. So how do we transform knowledge and versus how do we make sure that skills rather than knowledge are transferred? I think putting this into perspective, this is calling upon what we call for example, when we talk about competency-based learning, and then when we talk about skills and mindset, teachers need to be on board too. We tend to forget that. So I think somehow it was mentioned that in order for that to be embedded in our education system, we need also those teachers who are prepared to be prepared in a competency-based preparation. I mean, competency-based teacher training, maybe, which will give the teachers the skills and the mindset that are needed to be able now to shape some learners in a more skill-oriented way and in a more human capital way. Dr. Mansour has rightly pointed out the use of and the relevance of the 5 Ps: people, planet, prosperity, partnership, and which was the other one I forgot. But this is the basis of the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, when we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, we bring in again the social emotional learning. And when we talk about social emotional learning, a lot of people, lot of the panelists and the audience here brought the necessity in, even if we have online education, if we have other modalities of education, that social emotional learning is key. And now the point which tends to come out from here, I think, is transforming it as a new language, social emotional literacy. Let's call it social emotional literacy, which would be a new language that is taught at the foundation as a foundational skills, to be able to read, write, count, and be emotional. right? But emotional, that emotion should be taught, and it should be taught in a positive way. So that positive has to be defined. So that's the takeaway we are having here, because I'm not saying that it's not present in our current curriculum. It is, but it is often left as unspoken curriculum. The unspoken curriculum is this curriculum that we assume is infused in what exists on mathematics, but we want to have it as a part of the curriculum, as an explicit curriculum, which is spoken, right? This tends to come out from the discussions. And the last thing, which relates to the reforms and the actions, I think. Also, a lot of discussion came around the teacher motivation, teacher standards, and the career path. And I think education cannot happen, even online education, without teachers. But we have to redefine what is a new teacher that we are talking about, and how do we make sure that we attract talent in the teaching profession, and how do we make sure that we support them and we reward them throughout their career. And that seems things to come out, and just some reforms that I think that would be needed, that I'm also deriving from the discussions, is like a dual credit program. For example, why should we bind people to go through one set of credits or modules program, and when that person can be interested in some other issues? So we should tend in the future in personalized professional learning, meaning that the learner chooses his own pathway. It doesn't mean that he wouldn't complete his masters, but he would complete maybe a dual credit program, or maybe 3 of them or 4 of them, taking what is relevant for him as a learner and as an entrepreneur or as an innovator, or you just call it. So I think that also is going to be a must in terms of reforms and actions to be undertaken for the future. Last but not least, I think we've been talking about education as a whole, but education has different levels. So we have school education and the pre-primary school education, and then high education. And some of us here spoke about technical and vocational education training. I think all of these will need to some kind of reform themselves and define how also we integrate everything. We move towards what we call the badges and the credentials. Paper will disappear, I mean, with the diplomas and things like that. So I think if we have personalized professional learners, we should have also personalized badges and credentials, which will be captured, that will also characterize the learning process. Last but not least, it is, I think we didn't name it, but Dr. Sedere at some point touched upon it when he was talking about grading, and when he cited also Abdul Kalam, saying that maybe the least achievers are going to be the bosses of those who are achieving the best. So I'm deriving from there that probably we should move away from grading. Grading is not serving the purpose of education. Grading is serving something else, and we should move towards assessing what? Assessing, shifting the focus on the learning and the growth of the learners. So this is it from me, and I hope I didn't betray. The discussions were quite passionate to me, and I appreciated each of the contributions that I heard here, and would like to thank you once again, and thank you to the audience, and special mention to Himali, who has worked a lot in setting up this webinar. And I think this webinar will serve as a milestone and as a landmark to other national commissions, meaning that probably we will be reaching out to you guys again, and then after involving some other national commissions. So thank you very much. Over to you, Tarush.
Well, thank you, Omar. I would also like to end here by just thanking UNESCO New Delhi first for giving us an opportunity to organize an event like this. I have also been reading the chat section where a lot of people have expressed the desire to be given an opportunity to talk. I think our previous initiative on group discussions on futures of education was something that gave space to people to come up and express their views. I think for everyone who wants to talk and express their views and share their thoughts with UNESCO and Brainwiz, we will host probably more such forums for everyone where they can participate. And thank you again for Himali and Sri Lanka National Commission for taking this lead, taking this initiative ahead, and ensuring that we have a huge audience from Sri Lanka participating. I had some statistics to present, but very briefly, I can tell you that this is the first time we are hosting an event where audience from Sri Lanka has surpassed the audience from India. We have around 43% percent of the audience from Sri Lanka versus 37% from India. And hence, I think this is a great initiative. It has been very, very successful. We have had some great discussions with us. For all the guests who have been able to spare time and share their views with us, thank you so much for coming online, talking to us, talking to all the members present here. I hope you all have a great day ahead. I hope you all are safe during this COVID crisis. I will take your permission, Omar, and would like to end this meeting now.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tarish. I think you can end it, and then probably we'll reach out back to all those who have registered, sending the recording and the presentations, maybe.
Yes. In the meantime, I would also request everyone who's a part of this to fill up a feedback form that we have created for you. The feedback form is created with the idea of receiving your inputs so that we could include all of those inputs in the events that we organize in the future. The feedback link is pasted by Abhinav in the chat section. You can go there. It takes a couple of minutes to fill that feedback, anonymous feedback, so you can be open about what you want to talk about. But thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Thank you, Omar. Thank you, Huma, Himali, all the guests.
Thank you. Thank you.